So we've officially been blessed with new Ninjago content, and this time it was not by a leak. So this is what we got officially, being Ninjago Legends Monstrosity, and this series had a lot of hype around it. But the question is it good? Now before we even do absolutely anything, remember this is a full spoiler review. I don't want you guys to watch this video assuming that I'm going to be spoiler free. So this is your official warning, you have been warned. Yeah, I can't help you unless you hear this out. Now that is a very loaded question, you have to admit, but the fact is that it is a very interesting one. But to start off simply, Ninjago Legends Monstrosity is a short series released to YouTube that covers the events of Kai as soon as the merge occurred. There are 3 episodes: To Become a Monster, Fallen Master, and False Light, and each of them covers Kai in the immediate journey afterwards. And I do think it's very interesting to actually get. I do think it's interesting mostly because, of course, it does give us a lot of interesting questions that we can answer now, and there's a lot of theories that also can come from this. But let's again start off a little more simple. Starting off with the animation, I do think this is a very cool animation style to actually get. Of course, it's very reminiscent of the Golden Legends short that we got a couple years back, but it definitely does expand on it and ultimately does just look a lot cleaner at the same time. All the designs are absolutely fascinating. Of course, you've got these large monsters and they all look unique, they all look terrifying, they all look so interesting, and honestly, you can't stop staring at them. I've already watched Monstrosity now a couple times to be able to do this video, but the fact is that every single time without fail, I was just sat there noticing new details about these monsters. And the animation style just straight up doesn't end there. Of course, Wu looks great, the Fire Master looks great, Kai looks great, the mech looks great, Didnt looks great. All the different characters look so visually appealing and so unique. You can't help but just sit there and stare at them. Kai alone, in my opinion, has such a fascinating design. And every time he changed his design, whether it's like, say, changing the cape or the headband, for example, there are amazing little aspects that you just can't help but pick up on. And honestly, the animation team really need to pat their backs for this one. Of course, then animation then extends into the actual scenes themselves, not just the designs. We get some really cool looking fight scenes, there's some fantastic looking instances, you can really see where they play with speed, you can see where they play with the weight, the feel of everything. I think every single scene and every single fight scene does feel unique. For example, in the final episode, where Kai strikes down at the monster for the final blow, that is a fantastic looking scene, and the screen shattering animation really does finish that look. But that's the thing, it's not even just the fight scenes that look fantastic. There are so many scenes where we just see Kai saying sitting around, or he's just walking around, and he just absolutely looks brilliant. I think there's not a single scene that didn't have so much love and compassion put into it. You can really tell that the animators wanted to do a good job on this one. As for sound, I don't really have too much to say about sound design. It is really nice sounding. Obviously, all the dragons, all the monsters, all the screams, the shouts, everything sounds absolutely amazing. And of course, Vincent Tong, pat on the back to you, my friend. You have done absolutely amazing in this show, and you sound brilliant throughout. The voice acting was stellar. You can just tell that he had a lot of passion when he was actually making these actual voice lines. There was one scene in particular that does sit with me every time I do think about it. And that is simply the scene where Vincent Tong delivers the line, "If you think sparing children is weak, then you have no idea what real strength is." How he delivers that line is so beyond beautiful, and I can't help but absolutely love it. The final major aspect for any sort of show or film or movie is, of course, also the actual story itself. Now, the fact is that this only had a 15-minute runtime, so I honestly wasn't really expecting too much in the way of story, but honestly, we got a lot more than I was expecting. Kai, for the most part, of course, is just trying to escape the monster land. Of course, he's just trying to see his friends, and he also does imply that he believes they're all actually gone. So it's a very dark take on Kai, and I do think it's reflected in how he acts and how he behaves. And I honestly really do think, even though it wasn't too much, and it's a very simple goal, I do think it was a fantastic one to see. And he wasn't the only one that actually got an arc. Of course, Didnt the Dragon, she also has her own arc, and I do think it's a fairly interesting one at that, of course, taking revenge for her child. I do think that was a very fun one to actually see, and I do think it reflects nicely, and a nice contrast to Kai. And then finally, of course, you've got the mech, who of course, he did serve his old Fire Master, but now he is serving the new Fire Elemental, and he even gives his life for Kai. And I do think, again, a very fascinating one. Having his objective be to redeem himself after he believed he failed, I do think is a very interesting one. And Kai at the end honouring that fact, again, is fantastic. It's just some really solid stories. I just don't think there's a single story in this 15 minutes that feels rushed or weird or misplaced. It's weird that in such a small amount of time, they did get so much actually in there. And considering, like I said, I wasn't expecting much, the fact that 3 characters have something that I'm considering satisfying, I think is honestly big. And that's not even everything about the show itself in terms of the story. There's still so many little tidbits, there's still so many little Easter eggs that are still in that show that honestly, you kind of just have to experience for yourself. I mean, Kai using his blacksmithing ability in the short, I do think is a really cool instance. I also do think, obviously, we do get to see everyone else in the reflection in the final episode, which I do also think is a fairly solid one. I just think there's still a lot of little bits and pieces in the show that I do think does have a lot of interesting implications. But definitely the biggest one of all is the scene where Kai does remark that you have no idea how it feels to lose. You know, he talks about how he handles with his loss, all those little aspects. And he even says, you know, I've experienced loss before. And the thing is, he could just be referring to the fact that he believes all his friends are dead. But you could also take that as, for example, when he lost Nia. You could see that as multiple different instances of Kai's trauma essentially coming up. And honestly, I do think it's some really nice detailing and really does build on the character of Kai, because where he's usually the jokey funny guy, he does secretly have all of this sadness and all of this anger deep down. But like I said, I do think that's just the biggest thing of all. It's just this short series in particular really does continue to help a lot when it does come to the character of Kai. I do think Kai, for the most part, since Dragon's Rising, has definitely redeemed himself. And the fact that this is canonically the first thing he does in the span of Dragon's Rising, I think is honestly really interesting to see. But the fact of the matter is that I truly do reckon that this short has given Kai a lot of character, given a lot of personality, a lot of depth. I do think Kai in general really does benefit from this short series, and I think if there's anything to take from it, it's the fact that Kai has truly gotten some love from this. But in terms specifically of Ninjago Legends, where do we go from here? I mean, of course, Dragon's Rising is doing its own thing, and that's great, but the fact is that Legends has the opportunity to do something big and something incredible that we could not see in the show. And obviously, of course, this time round it ends with Kai with a newfound hope and a newfound motivation to carry on, and he walks off into the sunset. But what do we do from here? Of course, you could continue to expand on Kai specifically. You could have him continue to go through the monster lands. You could have him find the bounty, for example, because in Dragon's Rising, he does end up coming back to the monastery on the bounty itself. So Kai does find the bounty at some point. The other thing is that there's so many other things you could explain away. Of course, a lot of people have mentioned the fact that Kai has this flaming sword in Monstrosity, which is fantastic, may I add. But of course, people are wondering what happened to that sword. So if you were to continue Legends, you could have Kai discover the bounty, lose the cape and the sword. You could have him get back to the point where we do see him in Dragon's Rising Season 1. But if they don't want to touch on Kai and they feel fairly content with what they've done here, of course they can now set their sights on the other ninja. We could have what happened to Jay as soon as the administration found him, or how he lost his memories. We could have how Cole found the Finders and how Cole came to be with them. We could have a little more in terms of Nia. We could have how Zane and Pixel ended up in their cocoons. We could have so many different instances and so many interesting instances from Legends itself. And honestly, I think the opportunities are definitely ripe. But what are the theories that actually do come from these 15 minutes? And I'm going to be honest, there are definitely a couple of them. I mean, the main one for me does come from Kai himself, and now I do think we have a good idea on what his fear was from Season 2 Part 1. I think ultimately speaking, his fear was losing the ninja. And like I said, being in the monster lands like he was. Because the fact is that in the last episode of Monstrosity, they definitely played on that motion. That worry that all of his friends are gone. I do think ultimately speaking, it was never actually the monsters that made him afraid. Because during the series itself, he doesn't really act afraid. The main thing for him is the fact that he can't get out. And the fact is that the one thing that really did move him was the idea that he could be with his friends again, and I do think that driving force shows that his ultimate fear was losing his family. The second one I do have actually does come from the Ninjago wiki admin trainer Kin. I mean, follow him on Blue Sky if you haven't, and I did ask him for permission for this. Also, hello if you're watching, trainer. But your theory I did love, and that is regarding the Sword of Fire that we do see with the Knight Mech. I mean, of course, it is just the Sword of Fire, and it does open up a lot of different questions. But the fact is that the theory was that the Sword of Fire is actually a replica or an inspiration of the original golden weapon. Because ultimately speaking, it doesn't really make much sense for it to be there, and also for there to have been a Fire Master, the fire power had to have come down from the first Binjitsu Master. So the fact is that the golden weapon or the Sword of Fire had to already exist at this point. So I do ultimately believe, and I do agree with Trainer when he says, I do think that sword is actually just a replica, and also above anything, just a really fun Easter egg. And my last theory being that officially from this point in time, now we've seen Monstrosity and we have seen the effects that it actually did have on Kai, I do think Dragon's Rising will officially now expand on that very concept. I do think they will now officially mention the event of Monstrosity and they will give a sort of explanation for it. I do think it's now officially going to be within Dragon's Rising itself, and ultimately, I do think they will play on it and play on the after effects of that fact. Because the fact is that we don't actually see Kai mention it. So what if at some point down the line there is something that mentions or resembles what he saw in the Monsterlands, or they go to the Monsterlands and we find Kai having to explain and having to deal with that trauma once again. And so ultimately, I don't think what we've seen so far is done, and I think Dragon's Rising will cover it. And ultimately, I do think that's going to be interesting to actually see. But overall, I do think Ninjago Legends Monstrosity was a really good short series. I mean, ultimately speaking, the only thing I kind of wish is that it was a little bit longer. But for what we got, I honestly do think we got some really good stuff. And do I think it lives up to the hype? Mostly, I think it was a little too hyped. But ultimately, I do think it was still worth what we actually got. But let me know what you think of Ninjago Legends Monstrosity. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Is there anything that I've missed that you would like me to cover on? If so, leave it in the comments, and if I see it, I will definitely respond to it. But ultimately, that is about it for today, you guys. And thank you very much for watching. And again, let me know what you think of it, because I ultimately do think that Ninjago Legends Monstrosity was a very, very solid series, and like how it is with Dragon's Rising at the minute, some of the best stuff we've ever gotten from the show. But yeah, take care guys. Okay, bye!